Welcome back to Manga Historian's Complete Story Series. Today we're going to be covering Berserk 126 to 130. Now in our last video, Guts managed to break free from Farnese and her knights by taking Farnese herself as a hostage. As the night came upon them, Guts had to fight off the undead spirits while still trying to protect Farnese. Once the battle was finally over, the sun began to rise and Guts released Farnese into Serpico's care. Shortly after the events with her, the lands began to fall into despair. Lands across Midland soon became overrun with plague, and the armies of demons all destroying everything in sight. But as the country fell into chaos, the villagers all began to dream of that day. The day a shining hawk would come and lift the veil of darkness that had been cast upon them. Even as Laban walks along the desolate village, he watches the villagers who have been impacted by the war and he begins to feel sorry for them. But as they ride, a landslide erupts and Laban orders his men to hurry and help those who have been swept away. He himself jumps down to help, and as he pulls one of the bodies out, he can already see that the landslide has already claimed most of their lives. After helping those that he could, Laban continues down towards the nearby village to determine its status, and he finds the town empty, aside from a swarm of rats. As he makes his way through it, he finds an opening with mounds of bodies all piled up, all dead from the plague. A man tending to the bodies mentions that there's nothing here but the rats who have all grown fat from eating the dead. They were the only ones who came bringing the plague, so if he wishes to not become one of the dead, he best to be on his way. Laban turns to leave, and as he does, he begins to think that he can't help but think that there's over 70% of the country's military looking for one person who may or may not even be alive. But even the king too has been affected by this. It was 2 years ago that he started to have the look of a lunatic. A short while later, as Laban gathers his forces to move out, the rats begin to skitter around on a mound of bodies. As they huddle up, they start to bulge out, and a face begins to appear. The god hand, Conrad, then releases a few hundred spirits from his mouth, and the rats begin to scatter. Back at Midland's capital, Windham, the Midland king lays on his deathbed, calling out for Charlotte. As the doctor explains to Owen that the end is near for the king, he has sent for them to get Charlotte. But as he walks through a group of nobles, he begins to think about how none of these people care about the outside world, or how the people are dying from the plague. Owen continues on, making his way to Charlotte's chambers to inform her that the king's last wish is to see his daughter. But as he gets there, some of the handmaidens stop him and tell him that Charlotte has not stepped out of her room for 5 days. Even before that, she hardly left. Owen tells him that it doesn't matter, and he calls through her doors that her majesty is calling for her. Charlotte screams that the king is not her father and she will not be leaving this room. Meanwhile, as the king lays in his bed, he begins to see visions. Visions of him alone within the castle walls. As he sits on his throne, he grows cold, and he tells the guards that he'll need something to warm him up. That's when he begins to see Charlotte, and he says that that's exactly the warmth that he needs. Soon the guards begin to pull him back, and then a giant white hawk swoops down, covering Charlotte. The king watches, and then he sees the hawk change form, and he sees Griffith's face and his smile. As he calls out for her, the king slowly draws his last breath, and with the passing of the king, lightning strikes in the middle of the night, loud enough for everyone to hear. Everyone already knows what has just happened, and as Charlotte holds the two figures, she tells Griffith to come and save her. Elsewhere in a battlefield, men are being slaughtered, and the man standing above the severed bodies is Zod. While the crows peck away at the dead bodies, Zod sits upon a hill of bodies, thinking about how the humans are just so weak. It's been 300 years and I've yet to be satisfied. However, there is one, the Skull Knight. He wishes for a challenge, and the White Hawk appears before him. Zod asks, "What are you?" And the hawk tells him that he should have never wished for something like that. Hearing the hawk's words, Zod smiles and he starts to transform, shouting, "His only wish is to fight for someone stronger." The hawk soars through Zod's arm as he punches down, and then it cuts off one of his horns. Suddenly, Zod's face begins to split down the middle, and then Zod opens his eyes again, seeing himself sitting on the hill of bodies. He asks, "What was that?" And then he looks down to see the broken horn and blood pouring from his head. Meanwhile, with Guts, him and Puck find a place away from the village to rest. As Guts closes his eyes, he starts to see a pillar with the symbol of a hawk on the end of it. Torches begin to get lit, and as they all get closer to the pillar, he sees a woman tied to it. He looks closer and he sees that this woman is Casca, and the torches all start to be thrown into a wood pile beneath her. He calls for them to stop, but the flames rise as she screams out. Suddenly, Guts wakes up panting, and he sees the fetus that Casca birthed. He asks if it was it who showed him that, and then he tries to take it, and its face begins to change. Guts sees Casca's face, and it begins to tell him that there is danger. He must hurry, and the face slowly begins to burn and fade away. Guts asks what that could have meant, and then he realizes that something must have happened to Casca. Over in the woods by Godo's workshop, Erica cuts firewood, noticing the breath on her hands. As she does, she then starts to see snow, and she hears someone is seeing something in the distance. She turns back and sees Puck twirling around, and then claps her hands, catching him. Erica then runs back home shouting that she caught something incredible, and then she stops when she sees Gut's shadow. He walks up telling her that you've grown quite a bit, and she smiles. Back at the workshop, Erica runs in with Rickard hammering some of the horseshoes, and Rickard asks what is she so excited for. Guts then walks through the door and he laughs, telling them all, I hardly recognized you either. Rickard jumps up, telling him that it's been 2 years since he's left. How was he? But Guts stops him, asking, where's Casca? Both Rickard and Erica go silent, and finally Rickard mentions that Casca isn't here anymore. Guts shouts, asking, what do you mean? And as he yells, Erica starts to cry, shouting, it's not her fault. Rickard says that it happened about a month ago. Erica had taken her out of the cave since Casca wasn't sleeping or eating, and as they went to go pick berries, Erica turned back and noticed that she was gone. Guts shouts, demanding to know why he didn't go looking for her, and Erica yells that he's the stupid one. Through her cries, Erica says that she doesn't know how anyone's been since he left. Rickard went out looking for a whole month, but even still, he at least came back to them. Guts holds his tongue and he heads upstairs to see Godo. Godo tells him that they're so damn loud up there, a man can't even sleep in peace. He asks if it's the plague, and Godo tells him no, he's just old. He would have liked to have just died quietly, and then some idiot returned. Godo starts to get up from his bed, saying that there's no time to talk. Just give him the sword and the armor. As he examines both the sword and the arm, Godo mentions that the nicks and rust on the blade look like he's been at it for 10 years, fighting like there's no tomorrow. As Guts looks at him, Godo tells him to stop with that stupid look. In fact, he bets that if he didn't have this much hate inside of him, he wouldn't even be standing here right now. He goes on saying how hate is a place where a man who can't stand sadness goes. Guts laughs it off, telling him, so what? You're gonna preach to me now? And Godo continues telling him that his way of living isn't bad, but he can see the big nick in his heart. Fear has left a crack in it. Guts starts to hold his head, telling him that he doesn't know what it's like, watching all of these people die for no reason. Everyone was so young. They could have been something. And Godo stops him, telling him that he threw it all away 2 years ago. He left here leaving behind the one survivor, and he just left on his own. But since he could share his sadness, he escaped by himself to burn his own body with hatred, even leaving Rickard behind. Does he really have the right to seek revenge for his friends? He's like a sword without a sheath and a fatal nick. A broken sword. Later that day, Erica takes Guts out to the field where Rickard had been placing the swords that he had made. Rickard says that he knows this isn't the right amount of swords for everyone, but this is mainly just for memory's sake, just like they used to Doctor. Rickard then says that it's because of him that Casca survived it all. So really, they should be thankful. The three of them head down into the cave where Casca was staying, and Guts mentions that it really hasn't changed. While Rickard starts to light the fire, he says that they have a lot of catching up to do, and even though he may not want to, he needs to rest until they do repairs to his sword and fake hand. Guts hangs his head, saying about earlier he's sorry. Then Rickard shakes it off, telling him that he's sorry too, he was just concerned. But he did manage to do some important things here. As everyone leaves, Guts lays in bed, and even though he knows that it's safe there, he can't sleep without his sword. As Guts thinks to himself, he starts to think back to what Godo told him about leaving on his own. And then his vision starts to change, and he starts to see what happened on the night of the eclipse. The things that he saw with his right eye before he lost it. Griffith kissing Casca and then forcing himself on her, to throw her away, and then staring back at Guts. Guts shouts that he can never get over this. Those images are burned into the last seconds of his right eye. As Guts starts to think back, he begins to feel a presence next to him. A giant beastly presence. A voice tells him that he'll be covered in blood, continuing to kill. He will go insane and he will always be alone. Guts turns back to see nothing but a shadow, and he realizes that Godo may have been right. He was the one who left Casca behind. Out of everyone who died, she was the one who survived. But in the end, she told him that he would have to be the one to leave, so he did. It's the memories of everyone that still burns inside of him, the memories of her. That's what's keeping him from being sucked into the dark flame, right? The images of the fetus warning Guts begin to play through his mind. It's said that there is danger gathering at the holy ground, and Guts stands up with a newfound determination, telling himself, no, it's not too late to stop things from slipping by me again. From now on, I will never lose again. It's a couple of bridging chapters, but we are right back on track with Guts going to kill everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel to get your weekly dose of Berserk, and follow us on Twitter @Mangastorian.